Welcome back to Concrete Play. We're going to talk about world design. Specifically, we're going to talk about building vibrant worlds. When beginners are doing world design, a big mistake they make is they focus on stuff. People, places, nations, history, wars, future events, prophecies, special objects, magic, monsters, whatever. Stuff. That's all lore, and you don't need to care about lore. Lore is something that will be built up on its own naturally. You don't need to go out of your way to create a whole bunch of lore, and if you do, the players will hate you for it. Very few people liked the more recent Final Fantasy game, which had 12 hours of lore up front, where they talked about the LC of the fal'C, that was 12 hours of nonsense. It all made perfect sense if you were diving into the game, but loaded up front, it was just a load of lore that nobody gave a crap about. So instead, what you need to focus on is making your world as vibrant as possible. You can let the lore trickle in on its own. There's no need to really front load that. You don't need to work it all out ahead of time. The thing you do need to work out ahead of time is what makes your world vibrant. And that is whatever makes your world unique has to power a wide variety of stories. Think about it this way. When someone walks into a town in your game and they see a character walking back and forth in front of one of the buildings, you want them to think, I wonder what's up with that character. I bet they have something interesting to say. I bet that they are doing something about this. I bet that they are thinking about something like that. You don't want them to say, oh, it looks like the programmer got lazy and forgot to program a path in. So you need to have this world which etches itself into the brain of the player, where they can immediately start to imagine all of these stories unfolding. Just like lightning, just lickety-split, a new story unfolds in their head every single time they see a new NPC or a new monster or whatever. Sound tough? Let's go ahead and give some examples. We'll start with Star Wars. Now, Star Wars, obviously, everyone's talking about Star Wars. Star Wars is an incredibly vibrant universe. It is the most vibrant universe, and that is why it is so popular. Now, Star Wars does have a lot of lore in it, but the lore isn't what defines it. The lore just emerged out of, 30 years of, 40 years of history. The actual underpinnings, what we got with the very first movie, very little lore. It was almost all the vibrant beating heart of what makes Star Wars interesting, and the only lore that really existed was to bring out that beating heart. What is that beating heart? Well, I don't know whether he intended to or not, but basically he went into, by he, of course, I mean the director George Lucas, went into the old period films, the samurai period films, which were called, I believe, Jedi, and he ripped out all of the lore from those. He said, I like the feel of these, I'm just going to use the beating heart. And that was a very powerful choice. He took what made an entire genre work, and he ripped all of the cladding off of it, all of the stuff that slows it down, and he put it into this new universe. And he represented it very well in an easy-to-understand way with the Force. And he said, okay, well, there's light side force and there is dark side force. And will you fall to the dark side, or will you stay on the light side? Will you redeem yourself, or will you fall? And of course, this is something that has been around forever. I mean, it's basically the same in Les Mis. So it's not a new idea. It's an extremely powerful representation of that idea. Rather than leave it as some kind of foggy concept, he concretely points down. He says, this is light side, this is dark side. Here are some obvious in-universe examples. And it worked extremely well. Now, the thing that makes this so vibrant is that you can tell an astoundingly wide variety of stories with this. With just this concept of light versus dark, you can tell an almost unlimited number of stories about people struggling to find the lightness, to find the light or find the dark, people falling to despair or hate, people rising above it. You can tell these sorts of stories about personal metal. And that's a very, very powerful story that has a lot of different incarnations. And billions of stories have been told in the Star Wars universe. Fan fiction, any piece of fan fiction you care to name will have at least 5 stories in it, all of which are about the struggle to find the light or the dark, to fall or to rise, about human nature. It's a very powerful underpinning. It's an incredibly strong, vibrant heart. But it's also got a couple of other things that help it. The concept of the Jedi, or really any of the monastic orders, whether it's the Jedi or the Sith or the lesser known ones, this is a group of people that interprets the Force, and it has rules and regulations. But here's the thing. That produces a whole second set of stories where you are talking about how well someone gets along with those rules, whether those rules are good or bad, whether they fit the person, whether individual hearts are unique, or whether every single heart fits into this same rigid framework, whether or not a policy of hunting down those that fall is good or bad, whether or not it works or it doesn't work, whether or not the corruption that grows over 1,000 years' time can bring a holy order into darkness and all that stuff. There are a lot of stories to be told here, and they naturally descend from the fact that the Force exists. Because the Force exists, therefore, there are people that interpret the Force. Now we can talk about their interpretations. We can talk about whether or not locking in those kinds of interpretations makes sense, whether or not the hearts of people are that rigid and orderly. There are a lot of stories to be told there, probably as many as there are with the Force alone. There are so many wonderful, wonderful things happening here. Moreover, the vibrance of these two basic ideas isn't really limited to just the ideas, because in the universe there are a large number of things that can be used as touchstones to help you tell your story more clearly. The idea of places that have dark force, and you are wandering through and you're going to meet Darth Vader and your face is going to be inside of his helmet or whatever. The swamps. These ideas are very powerful because this is a way where you can show in a very concrete fashion the darkness inside of your character. You don't have to try and build an entire social framework just to show off his darkness. You can throw him into a swamp and he can hallucinate. It's very concrete, very easy to use. Similarly, the idea of a lightsaber. The lightsaber is a great tool because it is a concrete manifestation of your spiritual power. And I know that most of the games in which the lightsaber plays a part, it has like stats, and you build it in specific stats and you use different crystals. But in a movie term, in terms of what it means in the movies, it's just a physical representation of your heart. When you are destined to win, you win, and when you are destined to lose, you lose. And that is the nature of a fight in this sort of universe. Obviously, things get grayer when you start to introduce rules outside of these, storytelling guidelines. Similarly, the force powers that evil uses, you notice how the Emperor doesn't use a lightsaber, he uses lightning. Whereas the redeemable Dark Lord, Vader, uses a lightsaber and doesn't use lightning. Now, obviously, you can talk about all these reasons why. Yeah, he's an old man, so obviously he's not going to be swinging a sword around. He's also been burned badly. He's got nerve damage or whatever. Whereas Vader, he has a mechanical body, so he can't use lightning, risking his mechanical body, all that stuff. That's all secondary. The point is that the powers that these characters have represent their hearts, and the evil Emperor just does not have a heart that can be represented as a sword. It's that simple. So that is the nature of this universe. It's a vibrant universe where there are touchstones in the universe to help you tell these stories. Not only do the powers in the universe support these stories, what makes the universe unique that supports all these stories. But there are also things built into the universe that help to tell those stories more clearly. Wonderful. Wonderful setting. Wonderful setting. Talk all day about the various missteps after that, but we won't. Instead, we're going to talk about some other setting. Shall we stick to sci-fi just for kicks? Let's talk about Star Trek. I was thinking about using some other one, but what the hell? Star Trek's fine. Star Trek is a very similar idea in terms of it being something boiled down to something else. This is intended to show off the togetherness of humankind, and it is sort of considered to be a wagon train story. So similar to the way that the Jedi epics were decladded and all of the lore was ripped away, we got a similar thing here where all of the wagon train tales had all their cladding ripped away. And the result was we focused on the beating heart, which was the idea that people working together can overcome anything. To overcome challenges. Now, in case you think I'm making this up, this is literally what they say that the Star Wars was about. It's about all of the people of the Earth working together to overcome the challenges of the universe. So this is not me reading into it. This is explicitly what it was built to be. And this is a very, very powerful, vibrant, beating heart, because there are a lot of stories to tell about people working together to overcome challenges. There are a lot of different kinds of challenges they can face. There are a lot of different ways they can work together. Working together isn't straightforward. There are a lot of complications that arise, and you have to think about the many different kinds of things that might happen when you're trying to work together. So while Star Wars is all about your personal journey of redemption and your personal heart, Star Trek is about our collective hearts. And that's a very powerful tale that isn't easy to tell in Star Wars. So the two are often, Star Trek versus Star Wars, but really the biggest difference is that Star Wars focuses on a person's heart and Star Trek focuses on everyone's heart. Be that as it may, the variety in Star Trek is a little bit higher than the variety in Star Wars because the challenges aren't always personal. You don't have to represent a character's heart on a big screen in a concrete way, because the challenges are a lot more freeform. We might have all sorts of challenges involving technology, which is something that would never be told in Star Wars because there's no point. We might have challenges involving not understanding something, which isn't really your heart. It's your brain isn't working the same way. You might have overcoming personal limitations, sure, but not necessarily good versus evil. They can be other kinds of limitations. For example, Spock working to overcome his human half and then working to overcome his overcoming of his human half. So it was a lot of fun to build stories in this universe, and it's a very vibrant universe as well. Star Trek never really had the backing that Star Wars did in terms of fan fiction, because it's a little bit harder for fanfic authors to think collectively. Most times, a fanfic author will generally think of a personal story because they're one person. But if it had been a little bit clearer that Star Trek was about telling stories of groups, I think that it would have been a little bit more popular with fanfic writers. Not to say it wasn't popular, there are lots of them, but I thought it would be more popular if it had been clearer. So you're focusing on making your world vibrant right up front. What sort of interesting powers will your world have? Well, I know that this is getting a little tired, but in the past we have talked about a world where your character can absorb the hearts of monsters, sort of Pokemon-esque, I guess, except for instead of calling them out of balls, you just suck them up and put them inside your soul or whatever. Pretty straightforward idea. There's nothing hugely impressive about that, but we can take this idea and we can turn it into a very, very vibrant source of stories by making it very clear that this act is a representation of what we have inside of ourselves. So, for example, you take over a monster that's too strong for you, and you will feel that monster's strength overwhelming you. And that's a very good way to tell stories about, the impulses of your darker side or whatever. Very similar to the way that Dark Side Force is telling the same story, but in a much more granular way because we can represent it using any monster we want. So someone who's being taken over by a spider would feel very differently than someone who's being taken over by a dragon, and feel very differently than someone who's being taken over by an evil mushroom. There's lots of options for different ways to represent different kinds of personal struggles. In addition, we can talk about drawing strength from your more feral side, from your anger or from your worry, and that is also a very powerful story to tell, one that doesn't get told very often. We can also talk about the dangers of doing that. We can talk about how it's not you contain multitudes and they don't always get along. You got like 18 monsters inside you. You got to choose what sort of person you're going to be today. We can talk about how you might get along with other people who have different monsters inside them. It becomes clear that this has some potential to be a vibrant world, but we've got to be very, very crystal clear about how these stories can be told by telling them. We've got to bring in, right up front, examples of each kind of story. We've got to bring in touchstones that let the players grip with this kind of story. They did that in Star Wars too, where each of the major characters represents a different story that can be told in that universe. And that's a very quick and easy in to show the audience that it is a vibrant universe and there are a lot of stories to tell. We can do the same thing here. We can start off the game, introduce 5 characters in the first 20 minutes, and they all have a different piece of this kind of vibrant universe. So I want you to think, when you're doing your world design, when you're building up your world, instead of talking about lore, I want you to think about vibrancy. I want you to think about the stories that can be told in your universe, and I want you to make your universe really shine right from the start with a large variety of really, really heartfelt stories. And the further you can push that, the more your players are going to be like, oh, this is such a cool universe. Because yeah, any story can be told in any universe, but some universes really pop. So let me know if you understood that. I'm not entirely sure how clear I was. Hopefully I was pretty clear. And let me know what you think. Thank you.